Welcome to the Naked Bible Podcast, episode 459, Remembering Dr. Michael S. Heiser. I'm the layman, Trey Strickland, and he's the scholar, Dr. Michael Heiser. Well, that's the last time I'll get to say that phrase with his name, unfortunately. For those of you who don't know, Mike passed away February 20th of this year at 3:45 p.m. Eastern Time, just after turning 60. I mean, I'm going to fall so short here, folks. First and foremost, I just want to thank everybody for praying for Mike's family and myself. I appreciate the messages that have been sent to me. I see everyone. Thank you so much for including me in your prayers. It means a lot to me. And I know this show has meant a lot to a lot of people over almost a decade, these last 8 years. And that is the best feeling in the world. Thank you for allowing Mike and I to do this show for so long. I'm sure I'm going to fall so short of doing a tribute for Mike, but there are just no words. Mike he was one of a kind. He was unique. He was the Mike. I'll miss hanging out with him. I'll miss talking to him every week. I'll miss hearing his laugh. I'll miss his knowledge. I'll miss the books that didn't get written. I'll miss the conferences that I won't get to do with him. I'll miss walking through SBL and looking at the books with him. I'll miss being a fly on the wall and listening to great conversations Mike and other scholars would have. I'll miss fantasy football. I pray that I was a distraction from his work when we talked sports. Mostly, I'll miss all the things we'll never get to do. I thought about so many things to say, but I thought I would just share some random memories that popped into my head recently about Mike. Personal memories of me and him through these past 8 years. And I guess I'll start at the very beginning. When I reached out to him, I had been playing fantasy football with him in the Naked Bible League before the podcast started. And I decided to reach out to him and offer my services, being a tech guy. And he responded back via email. And this email had semicolons, and it was proper grammar and all the things. I mean, who in the world uses semicolons? Talk about intimidating. But he could not have been further from intimidating. You know, Mike was 6'3" in stature, but his brain, if you included his brain, he's probably more like 10 feet tall. He was a true giant, but a gentle giant. He had every right to be intimidating with his knowledge, but he was not. He had so much patience and grace. A true gentleman and a scholar. But in this email correspondence, it took me, I kid you not, probably an hour solid to respond to his email, because I had to look up the proper use of a comma and spell things correctly and don't end on a preposition. And all these things, it stressed me out. And I literally, kid you not, it had to have been a handful of sentences that I responded back. I mean, why would someone of his superior knowledge want to have a conversation with a lowly layman like me? As a lot of us have learned throughout the years who reached out to him and were amazed that he would respond and write back and take the time to communicate. Now, I don't know if the rest of y'all was as intimidated as I was when he actually responded back to your email. I'm curious, did you stress like I did when you wrote him the first time? Did it take you an hour plus to craft that perfectly worded email before you sent it to him? That's what I did. But again, I quickly learned to get over that because he could care less. He was the most approachable person. He never argued or said you're wrong or anything. It's a skill that he was blessed with that a lot of people aren't blessed with. The ability to take knowledge and parse it and to articulate it back into layman's terms that resonates with so many of us. I remember one memory when I first went to SBL with him in San Antonio, and he was at the same time he was researching the September 11th birthday possibility of Jesus. And he knew of a guy that was into star charts and had an entire theory and showed him all this. And I went with him to this presentation after dinner, and we went up to a penthouse. The guy had a friend who had a penthouse up on the hotel. We went up there. It was stocked full of snacks and food. It was fantastic. It was at night. It was glass window, floor to ceiling, glass windows. The skylight was amazing. And I then proceeded to watch a 2 to 3 hour presentation about the stars and the significance of it with the Bible. I kid you not. It was like I was at, do you remember Raiders of the Lost Ark when Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones, when the government comes to him in the first movie after he's teaching a class and they're sitting down, they open the book, Indiana Jones is explaining the Ark of the Covenant and the Staff of Ra and all this stuff. That's basically what it felt like. It's exactly what it felt like for me to sit there and listen to this with Mike, because this was very early on, probably the first year or two. And it was fantastic. I mean, it was absolutely fantastic. And it felt just like a movie. And speaking of a movie, we also watched the movie The Arrival, the alien invasion movie. It came out and I was like, Mike, you got to see this. Come on, let's go. And so I got to go to a movie about alien invasion with Dr. Mike Heiser. I mean, come on, people. How many of y'all are jealous right now? I kid you not. This movie was about deciphering the aliens' language, reading and speech and everything that Mike basically does for the Bible. I mean, and to be able to share that experience with him was such a blessing for me. And because of it, I walked out and said, listen, if the government, the U.S. government or any government, to be honest, ever contacts you about aliens, and they've got to call you to come decipher what they're writing or saying, and they want to hire you to work on alien stuff, you have to tell them that I am your assistant. And if it wasn't possible to bring an assistant, you have to call me just to inform me that aliens are here, the government's covering it up, and I'm actively working on alien technology or whatever it is. And we had a special code phrase. So because Mike and I love football, we bonded over that. Him being a Green Bay Packers and me being a Dallas Cowboys fan. Both of those teams played in Dallas in a NFL playoff game where the receiver Des Bryant went up to catch the football for the Dallas Cowboys and completely caught the ball and reached out his arm to score a touchdown. But as he fell down, the ball hit the ground and it came out of his hands. Well, at the time, the NFL ruled that was not a catch. It was a big to-do. He totally caught the ball. He made a move, took 3 steps, and stretched his arm out for the touch. And yet the refs did not give the Dallas Cowboys the touchdown, the call, and we ended up losing that game to Green Bay Packers in the playoffs. And it was a fun subject for me and Mike. And so I told him, if aliens come down and Mike is hired to work on it and I'm not able to go, or even if I can, I need him to call me. And the phrase was, it was a catch. So if I ever got a phone call or a text from Mike and he said, it was a catch, boom, I immediately knew that aliens are here. Mike is actively working with them. And I reminded him throughout all the years, just so he would know, because Mike had lots of stuff come and go and forget stuff here and there, what he said, what he'd been told, blah, blah, blah. So I would actively remind him of the secret alien catchphrase. And I would laugh and he would chuckle at that. And unfortunately, I never got that call. But I did have fun watching football and talking about sports with Mike. I mean, I was blessed. Another memory of watching the actual game. We went up to Fern and Audrey's place where I got to spend 2 weeks on the road with Mike. 2 weeks. Every day. 2 long weeks with Mike. And they were fantastic. But one of the first nights we were staying at Fern and Audrey's ministry house, and I was able to get the Green Bay game on the TV through the internet, stream the game. And so I got to sit there and watch Green Bay Packers football game, which was fun. And we were talking about his books. This is, probably 7-8 years ago. And I was asking him, hey, what do you like to write? What are you working on? What's some of your ideas? And just trying to pick his brain. So he proceeded to show me a spreadsheet of 20 plus book ideas that he had. And he was telling me about each one and whatnot. And I added it all up, was telling him, asking him, seriously, what could you produce a year? How many books could you produce? And we were talking and hashing it out. And it basically came down to he could write, if that's all he did full time, 2 books a year. And I was like, Mike, that's 12 years worth of writing. And it looked like that I had just slapped his face as hard as I could, because the look on his face was just astonishment, looking in disbelief. And he's like, I hadn't really thought about it like that. 12 years of books that we'll never get to read. Just what a big blow this is for biblical studies. On that road trip, we had some awkward conversations. I love Mike, and I hope y'all did too. I'm so glad that I got to bring out some of his personality on the show before we dove into serious topics on the Naked Bible podcast on this show. And one of those conversations in the car, we're driving and we're talking about New York. I mean, I'm in Pennsylvania, right? We're in the state of New York. And so I just look over at him. We're on our way to the Boston conference. And this is probably 6 years ago. And I look at him and I ask him with the most serious, and so I love Mike. He's got a dry humor like me and I love it. And I would look over to him and I said, New York, as we crossed the state line. New York, what happened to Old York? Where's that at? And you think he'd laugh, whatever, but he looked at me seriously and we had a little talk about it. Like, he's like, I don't know, Old New York. I was like, it's got to be England, right? I mean, we came from over there. So if it's New York, Old York has got to be over there somewhere. I mean, what's Old York doing? Where's that at? Maybe some of you English blokes can email me and let me know where Old York is. Cause we both didn't know. We just assumed it had to be somewhere, but we did know. What a funny, man, I'm going to miss having funny conversations like that with Mike. And on that trip, for those who have read The Portent, there's a scene that takes place at George's of Galilee restaurant in Rhode Island. Well, I got to eat there with Mike and Fern and Audrey. One, I never thought this Texas boy would ever get to go to Rhode Island. And two, eat at a place in a book with the author who is my favorite Bible scholar and with Fern and Audrey. I mean, what a great memory. What a fantastic memory. That was a lot of fun. Another random memory is just our first conference we had, the Naked Bible Conference. Mike does the first presentation and I had it all set up on a computer to do the slides on the screen for everybody and whatnot. And he's the first one up. So I told him, only touch this button. Don't touch anything else. Just touch this one button to advance the slides forward. This is the only button. First thing he does is, I don't know what he does, but he messed up the whole thing. He messes up the entire PowerPoint presentation. And I had to troubleshoot on the fly in front of 300 people. And it was not stressful at all, let me tell you. Finally, I got it back up. I don't know what he did, but he did something that was not normal. But I'm going to miss hearing him complain about technology, on how everything, the features, those bugs and stuff are features, and why do you got to keep changing stuff, and me help troubleshooting him and his stuff, and it's good. It's just good stuff. It's just good stuff. Probably my most favorite memory was my number one bucket list was to go to Jerusalem, and not only did I do that, but I did it with Mike. I mean, I got to sit with Mike in the Muslim quarter of the old city in Jerusalem, sitting in the street in some little coffee shop, drinking tea and coffee. What a blessing that was. I'm so thankful for Mike's friendship, and he's going to be so missed. I couldn't bring everyone on. There's so many people that have such great memories with Mike, and everybody's doing a fantastic job giving a tribute one way or another, whether it be online or whatever medium they have access to. They can share their memories and whatnot, and I know he would have loved that. I know his family appreciates it. And I thought it would be fun to bring on just a handful of people that have been a part of the podcast, or Mike one way or another, and let them get to say a few words to honor Mike. I am joined now with Dr. Tim Mackey from the Bible Project. And Tim, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts about Mike.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely, Trey. It's an honor to be able to do it. Obviously, sad under the circumstances, but a real honor. Mike means a lot to a lot of people, but he's meant a lot to me too. And I've gotten to say some things to him in person, but I'm happy to be able to share in this way now.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you share what he has meant to you personally?
Yeah, well, in a few ways. I first met Mike at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. His last year in his doctoral program in the Department of Hebrew and Semitic Studies, it was my first year. So we overlapped, which meant he was a dissertator, which meant that I rarely saw him. But because he was, working on his dissertation and getting ready to move forward to the next thing in his life. But I would see him occasionally around, and we would have a departmental tea time once a week. And so I remember first meeting him there and was just instantly fascinated with what Mike was fascinated with, because that's just what he talks about. And so we had a lot of just shared interests in theology and Hebrew Bible. But really, the memory that's really vivid was his dissertation defense, which was the first one I had ever seen in the department there. Again, it was my first year. And man, Mike just got grilled by his advisors. And I watched him withstand it. It was all kinds of things about the combat myth of in the ancient Near East, and then the way those themes are picked up with Yahweh versus the forces of chaos in the Hebrew Bible and the divine council. Of course, that's the stuff that Mike was passionate about. And so both the advisors that I ended up having too were kind of that wasn't stuff that they were super interested in, but they were advising him. So they had so many questions, and Mike was just so sharp, and he was just able in a really calm way to navigate through differences of opinion with his advisors. Also recognizing they're an authority over him in that moment, but it was just amazing. And it was exactly what you expect from Mike in that moment. And that made a real impression on me. It was, in the department about this is a environment where you don't have to agree with your teachers. But if you're going to stake out a view, you really have to be rigorous and think it through and provide the best arguments you can and acknowledge your own weaknesses. And just as a model of scholarship, that moment left an impression on me and really inspired me. So that's my first set of memories with Mike, was his dissertation defense.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the front row seat to what we all have enjoyed for the last 8 years on the podcast with Mike and his ability to just articulate and not get flustered on other people's criticism or views, but just honestly take it in as scholarship and mix it up and come back. And he's just so sharp, like you said, and educate us on multi facet levels and angles of biblical scholarship, and brought it down to us lay people who are fascinated in this stuff but don't have the time to go learn it or the money to go to school and whatnot. So we really appreciate that. And basically you were ground zero. You got to see that firsthand. So what an honor that was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah. And then I just kind of kept tabs on Mike and would hear about him. And I think the second main impression that he left on me was later on when he published The Unseen Realm. And I forget how I learned about it. I think it was through a friend. But I had always had a real fascination with the way the Garden of Eden narratives were echoed and linked back to and connected to later in the Hebrew Bible, and that they were way more important than many people thought as you read throughout the later narratives and poetry of the Hebrew Bible. And what I found in Mike was somebody who really not just believed that too, but could really show how the spiritual conflict the cosmic conflict at work with the snake and humans and God, really sets the plot line of the whole Bible. And so that was one thing where I found in Mike like a thought partner where I'm like, I'm not crazy. And then I just learned so much from him, more than I had even, gone down in my own studies. But then what I also really came to admire about Mike was his passion to make biblical scholarship accessible to people who are like normal and well-adjusted people who don't spend all their time reading ancient texts, and that he really wanted biblical scholarship to be available to a broader audience. And that was inspiring to me to watch him do that through his writings. And then kind of right around the time that the Naked Bible podcast was starting and his larger ministry of teaching was around the season where John Collins and I were laying the foundations for the Bible Project. And so I've really, Mike's been an inspiration for me along those lines. And I've learned so much from his books. And then we actually made a video series for Bible Project, a multi-part video series about the spiritual beings and the divine council. And we had Mike come out for a week and consult John and I as we wrote the scripts. And so the spiritual being series, that we have in our video library at Bible Project owes a deep part of its inspiration to Mike.
Yeah, those videos on the spiritual being series are fantastic. And I'm curious, have y'all gotten any pushback from the Divine Council worldview with the Bible Project?
That's a good question. Maybe.
I know you have. Naked Bible Podcast, so we get tons of pushback, so I can only imagine.
Okay, well, there you go. We have people on our team now who field, any emails that we get but what the reports that I hear from them are, by and large, people are friendly, interested, and when these topics come up, they're more just inquisitive about the new perspectives as opposed to critical. So I'm certain the criticism is out there, but I don't go looking for it, and so I don't know about it if it's there. What my experience, in presenting these ideas in other forms, it's fascinating. The biggest hang-up is about the stars being called the host of heaven, and then the host of heaven being the name used to describe spiritual beings, otherwise known by other titles. And so I think that worldview shift of the biblical authors associated these bright lights in the sky as images of spiritual beings. I think that's a hang up for, a lot of modern folks, but that's the most common repeated kind of consternation point that I have experienced in teaching this stuff. But for the most part, I think it gives people so much clarity about what they actually read in the Bible and why the spiritual and earthly storylines are interwoven the way that they are. So I mostly have good reports to offer. And I'm just grateful both for his learning, but also just for his passion and his heart and humility to want to make the story of Jesus intellectually credible, informed by good scholarship, but really in kind of weaving it into the lifeblood of normal followers of Jesus and the life of the church. And I just really want to honor what God has done through Mike's life. It's amazing. And it's a real witness to God's mercy and grace working through the life of one of his images. So, Mike, you are so loved, and we are so grateful for the generosity of God that was on display through your life and through your passions and through your work.
Well, it's a pleasure to be joined now with one of Mike's personal friends and colleague, who happens to be the Naked Bible Podcast's first interviewee, Dr. Ron Johnson. Hey, Ron, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Trey, I didn't know I was the first interviewee.
Yeah, you are.
Way back, okay.
Almost 8 years ago, to be honest with you. It's been that long. It's crazy how long it's been. But you were also at our Naked Bible conference, and was fantastic. And you have the claim to be our first interviewee.
Cool. Well, God made Mike for his role, and I was able to celebrate alongside of God, as it were, for 40 years, the Mike that God created. And most of my adult life ran parallel to Mike's, and my own theology is more responsible to Mike than any other human, I would say. So whether over dinner or on the phone or sharing a room at ETS, we were buds, and I cannot thank God and him enough.
I can only imagine the conversations y'all had together, and I was present for some of them, and we actually were able to record some of those conversations as well throughout the past 8 years at the conferences and whatnot. And I can only imagine you two talking together, what things y'all uncovered and discussed, and what a pleasure it was for me to be a fly on the wall those few times I was present for those conversations.
Well, you knew Mike, and here's one of his greatest attributes. You could say something to him, and I did this often. I could think openly in front of him, and I never got a "you're nuts" response. I always got a or a kind of a look up at the ceiling and a smile, a wry smile. And but he thought about it, and he didn't respond before he thought about it. And how many people in your life can you openly talk what you're thinking about, or openly say to someone what you're thinking and not fear repercussions theologically? And Mike was just that guy for me. So when you asked me to come on, I quickly got out a pad and pen, and I just wrote some things down. If you don't mind, I'd just like to go through them. What Mike means to me. I came up with 10 things, and if I can go through them quickly, I'd like to do that. Number one, his productivity was freakish. I'm a Vikings fan, where we talked about Randy Moss lovingly as the freak, and I think of Mike as a freak that way. What made his productivity be what it was really quite simple. He would ask the next question, and he learned to ask the next question, and then the next question, and then the next question, and so on. And that's brilliant, and I learned from that. Number two, Mike had fun, and we had fun with him. And I just left every conversation, whether it was a podcast or personal conversation with him, thinking that was fun. And maybe the Bible is more fun than I thought. So, but amidst all the fun, he took himself and his role seriously, believing that he was divinely called to do what he did, and what was behind him and in front of him was a divine task. Three, he made sense to the layman because he was a layman. To my wife, Susan, Mike was always good old lovable Mikey, and it never got beyond that. And that's a compliment, right? To me, he was a friend who loved talking 70s baseball as much as he loved talking about the Bible. And it's such a privilege. Four, he never got caught up in his popularity and even pushed it away. A long time ago, I texted him about something, and then I threw on the end of my text, have you ever wondered or caught yourself wondering that you've started a worldwide movement? And he texted back, no, I've just become an international irritant to a lot of people. That's just good old Mike. He doesn't see himself as popular, but he was doing what he needed to do. So number five, his goal was to never be theologically creative. We talked a lot about this, him and I together, that connecting dots was really what he did. And those dots had been lying dormant for a lot of people. But he took what liberals were often saying and turning it around. Instead of saying the Bible says this, but the Bible isn't true, he was basically saying, when you think of it, let's realize the Bible does say this, and it is true. And, that's not a new concept, but it's just an amazing one that he really championed, and I appreciate that. Number six, he set the standard by which this is amazing to me. Think of this, but it's true. He set the standard by which every coming evangelical book or article, when it comes to the study of created spirits or gods or angels, needs to be judged. From here on out, every writer needs to understand what Mike said, which is quite an idea, but I believe that's accurate. That's not an overstatement. Number seven, he knew what the gospel was when it came to performance or not performance. Or let me say it this way. He knew that the gospel was not about performance and being forgiven for poor performance. Believing loyalty is the phrase he likes, and that is huge. And this is where Mike's work hits the ground running, for most of us, framing the gospel not as forgiveness for past performance, but as joining a family and being loyal to the God of that family. So that's something I hope that we as evangelicals do not let go of, because that is a tragic blind spot in the modern evangelical world. Number 8, Mike has in the end made us privileged and responsible. Mike is being greeted by a well done, my good and faithful servant, right? And we can continue what Mike started, so that as we enter the next world behind him, we can get that same greeting. He's opened an amazing door for us, for thousands. And I cannot thank him enough. Number 9, as a 40-year some friend, let me just say to, everyone, he was in private everything that he stood for in public. It's a borrowed phrase said about C.S. Lewis, but this is what I think of Mike. When I think of Mike Heiser, he was the most thoroughly converted person I've ever met. And that was said about Lewis, but I think of that for my good friend Mike Heiser. His private conversations were as meaningful for me as anything he said in public. Number 10, quickly, just thank Drina. I want to thank Drina for sharing Mike with us. Many wives would have been frustrated by Mike's productivity, but to her credit, she lived with it and even nurtured it for us. And so I want to say thanks to Drina. Well, there's my 10, Trey. I could go on, but those are things I thought of in this last half hour when we talked, and they just naturally came off my pen. So,
pretty good list. I agree. It could go on and on and on, but that's a pretty good top 10 list. And we certainly thank you and Mike's friendship. I know it served Mike well to have friends, and you were such a personal, close one. And so I can only imagine how thankful and grateful he was for your friendship as well.
Yeah, well, friends don't talk about each other that much. We as Lewis says, we face the same direction. We don't face each other; we face the same direction. So that's what it was for me and him. My opening memory of Mike was in Bible college. We were walking somewhere, and we were coming out of chapel actually, and he said, "I noticed the chapel professor today said that we're supposed to read the Bible every day as Christians." He says, "Why should we do that? I already know the Bible. I read it." And I laughed and I said, "Well, you don't remember it, do you?" And he said, "Sure." He was kind of embarrassed by the question, and how Mike is. And I said, "Well, and I thought of some biblical statistic or something, and he answered it. And I said, "You've only read the Bible once?" And he said, "Yeah, like every other book I read." And I just remember, who is this guy, And it was just such a humble moment where I don't know how to, what do you do with that kind of story? That just resembles so much of how Mike became, for me, that person who thought about every biblical question as it were for the first time, saying, "Well, why do I have to believe that?" And he'd go back and study it from that angle. So long live Mike and his memory.
Thank you, Ron, for sharing your thoughts. Next, Dr. Brown wanted to take a few minutes to honor Mike.
I wanted to take a few minutes to honor our departed brother, Michael Heiser. First, blessings, grace to all the family. I can't imagine the loss you're experiencing now, what you're going through, but may God's grace be nearer than ever. May he pour out his goodness on you. And may the reality of where Michael is right now be very, very real to you as he's enjoying the presence of God. So Michael and I first intersected because of his unseen realm that suddenly took off. And as I spent time talking to him about it, it was the last thing that he thought that he's going to write a book about this. And suddenly it's going to be this Christian bestseller, books on angels, demons. So it was a shock to him. And we both have similar scholastic background, PhDs from secular universities and Near Eastern languages, literatures, things like that. So a lot of our studies intersected when he was writing about unseen realm and council of the gods, the divine council, and in ancient Near Eastern literature, Ugaritic literature. It's like, yeah, we all learned this stuff and studied it. And sure, the Old Testament reflects coming out of that in spiritual environment, of course, with a new message about this one and only transcendent God. but we started to interact, and then we met on one of the internal trains at DFW Airport. I got on the train, and there he was, and we recognized each other, just going from one terminal to another, and started chatting. And I said, I've got a difference with you on Romans 11:26 interpretation. He goes, I could be convinced. We were smiling and just going back and forth. So we've always had that relationship of camaraderie and similar honor. And I've so enjoyed seeing God give him prominence with the podcast and all of his books, because it was so unexpected to him. Obviously didn't change who he was, but it was the last thing on his mind, or what he thought would happen. So just to challenge Christians to look at things afresh, to get deeper in scholarship, and just to be honest, here he was, a believer without pretense. I remember him talking to me about moving to a new location and a new church base, and discussing it with the pastor and saying, probably some of the things that happen there I'll be a little uncomfortable with. He says, but that's the case wherever I'm going to be. And there he just was, steady and seeking to honor the Lord and get people thinking, get people reading the scriptures, get people thinking. And in that regard, in a short period of time, really shifted a lot of views. And of course, there'll be controversy and back and forth discussion for years to come, but got people thinking about things they hadn't thought about before, and even gave people, in keeping with Naaman's podcast, just this ability to be raw and to be honest. And we don't have to put on some kind of show or adhere to a certain thing just to say we do it. Let's think, let's talk, let's look at these things, and let's be honest about our questions, about our doubts, because God has answers for us. It was only a year and a half ago when I was in Jacksonville to record a series of TV shows, That's Debatable, that we really got to hang out, drive in the car together, have a meal together, just spend more time, and then do our one and only debate, which is now, a living classic. Is a Frankfurter a hot dog? Is a Frankfurter a sandwich or not? He was assigned no. I was assigned yes. I thought I won the debate soundly. My wife told me, no, of course not. Frankfurter hot dog is not a sandwich. So there you have it. He wins, and his legacy lives on. So, Michael, you're missed. You will be missed. But soon enough, we'll be discovering things we never dreamt about in terms of the beauty and the glory and the character of God. You're ready to step ahead. We'll catch up with you one of these days, be together. Until then, may your legacy live on. May your writing stimulate lots of thought, lots of conversation. And may your family encounter God in a way beyond anything they've known to make up for your absence in the days ahead. God bless.
Well, we're blessed to be joined now with Fern and Audrey from discoveringmercy.org, and I certainly know how much Mike means to y'all.
Yeah. I so appreciate Mike and his work and love him very dearly. My heart towards Mike is very filled with a lot of gratitude. I am going to tell a little bit of my history so that you can see the impact that his work has made for me. And so more than 20 years ago, my journey started with a question of what is really love? What love is? What is it? I didn't know. I grew up in a Christian family. In the church I was in, there were pedophiles, and there was abuse for me all growing up. And so I walked right into an abusive marriage, and it was brutal in every kind of way. And so I never understood what love really was. And that question propelled me into answering that question. I was in the middle of a divorce that was very, very bitter and volatile with my 6 children. And he was brutal. And at one point in that beginning of separating and divorcing with him, he had badgered me so much and said everyone was against me, including my family. And there was a moment that felt like the whole world was against me. And he was a worship leader at the church. So the spiritual abuse on top of all the other abuse, I had lost all of me. And so in a moment of desperation, I had overdosed. And the taunting that I had in my mind, I didn't know it at the time, that it was intelligent evil. But the taunting was everything of disdain of humanity and of my life and everything in every way. Fortunately, I didn't die. I should have. It was a massive amount of medication. And yet the Lord sustained me, and I know that in hindsight. But as I was on my journey after that, I thought, I'm never doing that again. I got to do something to help my children. I have to understand this for the spiritual realm, for our physical realm, all of the trauma that comes up against every human being. Why? What can we do to stop that, to help people on those journeys? And I remember the exact moment reading, it was The Myth That Was True, the draft for the Unseen Realm book. I remember laying in my bed thinking, oh my word, this is the love story of God's love towards humans. And I read the words that the intelligent evil, however you want to say it, powers, principalities, whatever name you want to put to the evil forces, when the realization hit me that they no longer have authority over human beings, there's no fear for that now. We don't need to fear men. We don't need to fear the spiritual realm. That impact alone in my life as a survivor of the abuse I lived in, if you have that understanding for the folks that we work with, trauma-based mind control, satanic ritual abuse, they're all under the captivity of small g gods, of intelligent evil, because as a child, they were deceived that they had authority over them. And my heart's cry for everyone to understand what Mike had done with the divine counsel and the understanding that we are joint heirs with Christ, with him in us, and we operate out of love and mercy and compassion, the intelligent evil flees. It's so simple in spiritual warfare to have the understanding of being in your body, which is what most survivors are not in. Survivors of trauma are dissociated out of their body. That is why darkness gets away with what they do. When we understand Mike's work and practice in our lives, staying in our body, in our heart, there is no more powerful spiritual warfare than that. Darkness can't stand to be around love, mercy, and compassion. So I am very thankful for Mike. I love him dearly. His work had brought me out of captivity, and it's helping others come out of captivity. And I want to just say, I love you, brother. Thank you so much for your lifelong work.
And so, Trey, I'd like to just bounce in here and just continue the story of really what we've learned about spiritual warfare came from Mike. I'm grateful for my brother as he sat with me as I came out of the charismatic tradition, and he graciously, lovingly sat with me with folks here at the office, and for 7 years, 3 days, and he really just worked with me on my theology. He went over things like covering, like generational deliverance. And for the past 3 years, he's been saying, got to explain to them the spiritual warfare of what you see and how you see it. Because every now and again, Audrey and I would just, clue him in on what happened in our office or in our world. And he goes, you've got to share this. And so I want to share what he's been prompting for the last 2 years. We had this survivor of trauma-based mind control who was coming out of severe programming and conditioning in the spiritual realm. He was in our area, and I stopped in and checked on him to see how he was doing. And the door was ajar, and I walked in, and I smelled something weird, and I went through the house, and here down in the basement, I could see through the one door, it had a glass door, that it was all filled with smoke, and there was loud chanting type music. So I went over to the door, and I saw that there was a pentagram on the ground, skulls lit with the active incantations and conjuring. And I swung open the door, ran over beside him, put my arm around him, and I said, I didn't know that you were struggling so. I'm here. He jumps up and he swears at me and he says, look what you've done. And he walked out, and I opened up the little window there to get the drug smoke out of the area. And I looked over at the burning candles on the pentagram, and I got my phone out and I took a picture. And he comes back and he goes, are you serious? You just took a picture of my pentagram and me in the middle of a ritual? And I said, yes, I want to send it to Audrey. I want her to see that you're struggling so she can pray. And he goes, I can't believe this. He comes in, he blows out the candles, and he goes, you ruined everything. It took me 2 hours to conjure that much. And I said, but I'm here. So he wasn't real thrilled. But the next morning, he came to the office, and Audrey and I were sitting with him, and Audrey said to him, what was that about that you were so angry when came in? There was love there. And let me just press pause. Did I discern demonic? Did I feel the evil? Yeah, all of that. Every piece of it. I was in a different place. I was seeing a ritual. I was seeing someone in a trance, and the music was screaming Lucifer's King. And I felt it all. All I really felt was love for them. That's all I felt. I went toward their heart. And so here we are, and Audrey asked the question, what was that about? I mean, it dissipates in one moment. And he looked at her and a little ferociously said, I understand love is stronger, but don't you get it? I'm not allowed to be loved or to feel what that feels like. And then we could start the process of helping him. And so when we say that spiritual warfare is about you being in the body, you being sitting back in love with the Spirit of God inside, it's from that place that you can't be seen. And that's the place that we hold in spiritual warfare. There has never been a time that we move out of that and go after the taunting and the punking that comes from the higher level intelligent evil. We had an opportunity to talk with a Navy chaplain who was overseas, and he explained it the same way. He said, it's like you get punked. And so I just want to say, Mike was the one that kind of showed us the place of this, the mystery of being a human being, being a frail human in the body with the mystery of the presence of the Lord by his Spirit being inside. And so I am indebted to Mike for being my brother, coming alongside of me and loving me to help me with my crazy theology and anchor it into a divine counsel worldview. He never once judged me. He sat with me so that I would understand what love really is and who I am as a frail human holding the presence of the Lord inside. I am forever indebted to my friend Mike.
The fact that a Bible scholar had such an impact in y'all's type of work, speaks volumes on how much the Lord was using Mike's works. Working with y'all over these years through Mike, it's been a blessing, and I know how much I love Mike. And again, I know you're going to continue his legacy of using his content moving forward, and that's the greatest gift of all that Mike could have left everybody.
Yeah, it sure is, Trey. His work is woven through everything we do every day in our curriculum and how we minister. He has been a blessing.
Yeah, he really has. So many people are on their way to freedom because of this understanding.
Well, I'm joined now with Dr. Justin Bass, who has been on the podcast a few times before, and he's currently teaching at the Awakening School of Theology and much more. And, thank you, Justin, for joining me now to honor Mike.
Honored to do it. Thank you. 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 15 through 18 is one of my favorite passages really in all the Old Testament. The prophet Elisha prays that his servant's eyes would be open because he is terrified of the Aramaean armies surrounding them. The text says when God opened his eyes, he saw the angelic armies, these celestial horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. I love that text for so many reasons, but mostly because there's just some kind of sixth sense that we all have where if God opens it, we see what is really going on in our world. In other words, we see the unseen realm. Dr. Heiser has that sixth sense, and like Elisha, he has opened the eyes of tens of thousands across the world to what God is doing in the unseen realms. I'm so thankful that I got connected with Mike and his work in 2020. He is, of course, a brilliant scholar, but interacting with him for the last 3 years, I can testify that he is a good man, full of the Holy Spirit, and he's become a good friend. It's been such an honor to fill in for him at Awakening School of Theology, being a guest on his podcast, and now helping to finish some of the podcasts on 1 Samuel. Like so many, I'm heartbroken that God took Mike so early, but I'm thankful for his incredible legacy. He's already lived 3 lifetimes of scholarship by 60 years old. I mean, his Awakening School of Theology, his books, articles, work in Logos, 458 podcasts, and tens of thousands of students and followers who are hungry to keep digging deeper in God's Word. We will keep the torch of solid biblical teaching burning. We will keep proclaiming the weird stuff. I have no doubt Dr. Heiser heard Jesus say recently, "Well done, good and faithful servant." We can all find great encouragement in the fact that Mike is now seeing Jesus face to face. Dr. Heiser has passed the torch to us. Let's carry it forward.
Well, I'm honored to be joined with Dr. Carmen Imes, one of our favorites on the show. Everybody knows her and loves her book, so we appreciate her coming on to take time to honor Mike. She did a lovely tribute herself, and I just want to welcome you, Carmen, back on the show, and I appreciate it, and I know Mike appreciates it as well.
Well, thanks for having me, Trey. I wish this was a different occasion that was bringing us back together. It's just such a loss to be losing Mike. And when I think back on all that I've learned from him and the way that he's modeled public engagement, I'm in awe of his legacy that he's leaving. Mike was podcasting literally before I knew what a podcast was. When he first invited me onto the podcast, I had to look up podcast. I'd heard the word before, but I wasn't really sure what people were talking about. He's just left such a vast number of resources for people to keep exploring, and I'm grateful for that. The websites that he's created, and I think especially the thing that strikes me is his ability to translate scholarly journal articles and monographs into language that lay people can understand. He never treats his audiences as though they're not smart enough. He just explains it. I think Mike realizes that if you really understand something, then it's possible to explain it to anyone. And he's made biblical scholarship accessible to so many people. And by doing that, he's lit a fire for people to dig deeper into Scripture. And there's this hunger I sense among those who read his books and go to his conferences and listen to the podcasts, that there's just this deep hunger to understand Scripture and to share that with others. And so I love the way that Mike has introduced his audience to other scholars like myself. I have no idea where I'd be today without Mike's invitation to be on his platform, to be on his podcast, to connect with such a remarkable group of listeners and readers. And I'm so grateful for that. It's energized my own scholarship, just interacting with so many of the Naked Bible listeners. And when I think back to 2019, which is when I spoke at the Naked Bible Conference, I can count a number of people who've become friends who I met at that conference, who were there as participants, and who I now interact with on a regular basis. And I just treasure those friendships and the way that their questions and comments have spurred on my scholarship. And so I'm just really grateful to Mike. He may be leaving us soon, but he will not be leaving our hearts. And he'll continue to teach us with all that he's left behind.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that I was there during that interview, of course, with Mike and the podcast. And
You
I
were there.
remember after your interview, I grilled Mike on how the whole publishing industry works for academia, because I was like, her paper needs to be a book, and I don't want to wait 2-3 years for it to get published, which unfortunately we had to wait. But he educated me on that whole process. But you were the one that planted the seed for me to do the Naked Bible Press and try to get scholarship out there quicker. And we really didn't transpire anything from, nothing transpired from that too much. But that conversation after your interview, I'll treasure forever, because just Mike and I talking about your paper specifically and how the whole industry works and how y'all try to get published after a paper.
It takes so long.
Yes.
It takes so long. In fact, the paper, I first met Mike when he came to hear me give a paper at a regional ETS meeting, and just the wheels of progress turn slowly. There's always so many things going on, but I still have not published that paper, and I would really like to. I've revised it. I've gotten it ready to send in, and I have not sent it anywhere yet. But papers that I've written since then, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, are still, in the pipeline somewhere, clogged and not out there yet. So, yeah, I appreciate that desire to get scholarship out to people more quickly, because it is a long road.
Yes, it is. And what's great that Mike helped expose is there's appetite for it. There are people wanting that content that you're in particular are producing, and that's great that this podcast and everything else you're involved with, the Bible Project and your own stuff, is providing that content like Mike did. And we appreciate all the work that you're doing yourself, and it's a pleasure to have you on the show and to know you, and I look forward to what the future holds for you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Trey. It's been a joy to get to know you through Mike, and I hope that our engagement continues going forward.
Well, I'm honored to be joined with Dr. Matthew Halstead. People may remember that he did the Paul's Use of the Old Testament series on the podcast last year. So, Matt, I appreciate you coming on and honoring Mike.
Yeah, Trey, thanks for having me on. I really, really appreciate it. The honor to be able to share some personal thoughts and just honor Mike and just publicly thank the Lord for being able to hang out with him and get to know him. Thanks again, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I've been thinking about how can I put into words Mike's contribution to our understanding of Scripture, and quite honestly, I just can't find enough words to do that. I mean, his contribution to our being able to read Scripture and understand Scripture is just immense. Like I simply would not be the same sort of person today had it not been for Mike. I mean, Mike was just so instrumental in helping me engage the text and not to shy away from it. Anything that it said, Mike has always said that, if it's weird, it's important. So, I mean, Mike has taught us to pay close attention to every detail of the text. And I just so appreciate that. As a Christian, as a scholar, I mean, he's taught me so much in that regard. And, his passion has always been to bridge that great divide between the academy and the church. And I resonate with that. That's my passion too. And so I was immediately attracted to his vision and immediately attracted to all of his work, because his goal has all along been to help us understand Scripture, as I said before. But his goal is more than that. It's to bridge the work of scholars and to bridge what's going on in the academy with the person in the pew. And I think that's so important, because his commitment to bring good content to his listeners, to his readers, is one of those things that really has been lacking in the church. And he saw a need, and he stepped up to the calling that God placed on his life, and we are the better for it. That's just the best way to put it. And we're so grateful that he chose to follow God's calling and to help us to see the beauties of Scripture and write good books and film great videos and teach great lessons. So we're super grateful for that. I mentioned this a moment ago, but Mike deserves accolades and a million rounds of applause for teaching people to never shy away at all from the hard stuff in Scripture. Never shy away from the weird stuff in Scripture. And oftentimes in the church, that's exactly what we do. We shy away from the things that are difficult to understand. We shy away from the things that might cause us to question our assumptions. But that wasn't Mike's way of doing things. Mike wanted the truth. He pursued the truth. And no matter where the truth took him, he was going to engage Scripture faithfully. And that's one thing that we all walk away having learned from studying under Mike and listening to his material. It's interesting. I thought I would share just briefly how I first met Mike, and it kind of goes along with what I was just saying about Mike's commitment to never shy away from the weird stuff. I first met Mike when I reached out to him via email. It was when he was working for Logos, and I won't go into details on all this, but essentially I had a kind of a weird supernatural experience. I mentioned this on the podcast when I was on the show last year, but I went through this time where I was like, man, I really need to figure out what that experience meant to me. And so I began reaching out to friends and colleagues and people in the academy who write books on these sorts of things that I thought might be helpful. And of course, one of the people I reached out to was Mike, and I had never met him before. So I just sent him an email, and he graciously responded, and I shared, of course, my experience with him, and he made this comment. He said, "Yeah, I've kind of gained the reputation of being a person or a resource that people could come to, and that would be a person that would give them comfort to know that I'm not going to make fun of them. I'm not going to say they're weird because they had a weird experience or a supernatural experience." And I just immediately felt comfortable with Mike, and I knew that he wasn't going to consider me weird or fringe or crazy or whatever. And he really just took it seriously. And I so appreciated that. So, since then, through the years, we've obviously maintained correspondence and talked, email. Our schools actually partner with each other. The school I work for partners with Awakening. And so that's been a big blessing. And just through the years, we've, maintained contact. And he obviously invited me on the show for the Paul in the Old Testament series last year, which, I can't reiterate this enough, but that was such a huge encouragement to me as a young scholar to have someone of Mike's repute and standing to invite me on and to let me talk about my passion on his show for 12, 13, 14 episodes. So that was such a huge encouragement to me. And I guess I would just end with that. I would say, not only professionally has he encouraged me as a scholar, and he has done that for sure in more ways than I can say, but at the heart of it, he's encouraged me as a friend. He's encouraged me personally. And the truth is, I will never forget his support for me, his encouragement to me, and all the kindness that he's shown me. And I'm just so thankful that I got to know him.
I'm happy to be joined with Joe Fioramonte, who actually helped Mike create his drmsh.com website and several others. And Joe was, I think, very instrumental in helping Mike get his content out there, especially from early on. And Joe, we appreciate you coming on and honoring Mike. And I'd like to start off with, how did you find Mike and what led you to help him with his content?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for doing this, and thanks for having me on. It's really been an honor to work with Mike and with you over the years. And it's really been a blessing to be able to participate in a small way. I remember I first came across, well, let me back up. I was kind of a big Chuck Missler fan. He was digging into the stuff that always confused me in the Bible and trying to get to some answers. And I think he did a really good job. But Chuck was more of a generalist. And a friend of mine, my friend Clay, said, you gotta listen to this guy. And it was a recording from I think a UFO conference in Roswell that Mike had spoken at. And, I was very hesitant to listen to it because it was alien stuff, which wasn't a big interest to me. And he kept bugging me, you got to listen to this guy, Michael Heiser. And so I finally I put it on and listened to it, not expecting much. And I mean, the amount of just real intellectually honest and well-researched information he dropped at that conference was really impressive to me. And, it was very clear that he was a Christian who loved the Lord, despite the strange topic. I'm thinking, oh, this was really interesting. And so I started looking up other things he had done, clips I could find on YouTube. There wasn't a whole lot. And started reading some of the material he had put out. He had built, I don't know, a dozen websites using WordPress. He wasn't technically savvy in that sense. And why should he be? It wasn't his discipline. And so it took a lot of legwork to kind of find a bunch of his stuff. And I was reading through it. It was just such great material. And there were so many things that, like, when I read them in the Old Testament, especially, it's just like, that's weird. What do I do with that? And Mike's work dug deep and gave very well thought out, thoughtful answers. And I was just, blown away by his work. And, my gift is kind of organizing content like that and presenting it in a way that's a little easier to consume and find your way around in, being a graphic designer. And so I reached out, sent an email, and said, hey, I really like your work, and made it clear that I was pretty well read in this stuff. I think when he wrote back, he said, I can tell you kind of know what I'm doing here and what I'm about. And I said, let me help you. And so I spoke with him on the phone, and he said, sure, if you want to help, knock yourself out. And so I just kind of built a website, and I talked with him on the phone a few times and kind of thought about all the different kinds of content he was dealing with, because he's kind of an odd author to work with, being a biblical scholar and interested in some of the paranormal stuff and then the Stitches is Wrong stuff. And, there's just a lot of different audiences for different kinds of content, and just worked closely with him on that to organize it in one spot and make it easy for people to find the stuff that they were into while getting introduced to some of his other work as well. And I feel like that was successful. And like I said, I was just honored to have the privilege to work with him.
And for those that don't know, Joe is also the creator of the logo for the Naked Bible podcast. And we appreciate that. If you go to drmsh.com, you can see a lot of Joe's work. And Joe, I know Mike, probably his content wouldn't have gotten to where it was if it wasn't for you. So I know he appreciates your efforts. And everybody out there should know, that you had a hand helping Mike get his content out there. And with that, man, I just thank you for your hard work throughout the years. And I know Mike appreciates that. And just thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. And, I don't feel like I'm some great designer to get to come up with that stuff. I feel like I was just really blessed to be the one who got to do that stuff. I'm confident Mike's work was so good, it would have gotten out there. And I think that's how God works is, he's got a lot of options, right? I don't think the Lord's at a shortage of resources, but, I'm really blessed to work with him and get to know him over the years. I live in Florida here. And when he and Drina moved out here and we got to spend a little more time with him, I just learned so much, not just about the Bible, but about the character of God. And I think the thing I'm most thankful to Mike for is being more comfortable not knowing everything. To meet a guy like him who knows so much more than I ever could, and to see how comfortable he is looking at other points of views and just thinking at it from different angles and concluding that we're just not going to know in this lifetime, and being okay with that. I think it was really, really hard for me, and I really struggled with his work at a point. I had many crises of faith by reading his work, but I'm stronger for it. And, I think he had a humility and intellectual honesty that's hard to come by. And I'm really going to miss that about him a lot.
All right. Well, I'm happy to be joined with Brenda, who has been in charge of our transcripts for how many years now, Brenda? 5, 6, 7? 7 years. Oh, my gosh. Yes. I mean, I know everybody who listens to the podcast appreciates the transcripts, and Brenda is the power force behind that. And without her, you would not have the transcripts as good as they are. And Brenda, I think, just like me, your actions speak louder than any words can on how much you love Mike and honor Mike's work in the podcast. You believe in it. And I think your work ethic and what you've contributed to the community over the past 7 years speaks volumes. And we thank you and appreciate you. And I know Mike does, and we love you for that. And just thank you so much for everything you've done to support us through the years.
It's been such a privilege to have the chance to be involved. So thanks for letting me. It's nice to be at your side in this venture. Thanks for giving me this chance to just share with everybody how Mike has influenced me. So I think that overall, I represent the kind of person that Mike has always been targeting. I'm a serious Bible student on my own. I haven't been able to justify the time and the money it would take to get an actual seminary degree, but I study the kinds of things that would get me one. So, and that's because of Mike. He's been aiming at people like me all along who will take what he's bringing from academia kind of to the middle of the bridge and come and pick it up from the other side of the bridge and take it to the people in the church. So that's really been what I've been doing over these last several years. A funny story of when I started teaching, I was teaching some of the Divine Counsel worldview, and I didn't know about Mike's work yet. I didn't know to call it the Deuteronomy 32 worldview or anything like that, but I was teaching a class at my church that had a little bit of this in it. And the week after I taught this, a lady called a popular pastor radio show and asked him about Psalm 82 and whether this interpretation I had given was correct. And this man, he said, I've been dreading for years that somebody would ask me about Psalm 82. Isn't that funny? And so he was worried about it. And so clearly not confident. But then he very clearly said that he did not think my interpretation was correct and that she'd be better off finding a different teacher. So that was a little bit discouraging there. Not exactly because of that, but as an offshoot to that, my material that I was teaching kind of went under review for a couple years and I had to wait to teach some more. But it was right at that time that Unseen Realm got published. And I got it and I realized that everything I had learned on the Wild West of the internet had originally found its source in Mike, right? All roads kept leading back to Mike Heiser on this topic of the Divine Counsel because he had produced the best material about it. So I just devoured Unseen Realm and his credentials, Mike's credentials really were a huge part of me being able to support my position and even being allowed to continue to teach after that. So that's simplification of the whole story, but was so grateful. And what happened then is because of Unseen Realm, I started looking into like more of the stuff that Mike was currently producing. And I found that podcast that he did. Do you remember what it was where he talked about Christian Middle Earth that first time? Well, he was on somebody else's podcast and he was being interviewed and he was talking about
Canary. Was it a Canary, Cry Canary or?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when he started talking about that whole thing, I just started crying because it was the first time that I ever felt like somebody understood me and like the weird things that I was interested in and just the topics that I found fascinating and wanted to keep learning about. And he just really validated that some of us in the church have these curiosities and desires to know things. And I don't know, it just put words to something that I just didn't know that I wasn't alone until then. So then I found his podcast and of course started listening. And then in one of those early issues of the e-newsletter, the McClat newsletter, he said he was looking for a transcriber for the podcast. So I thought, well, I can type fast. I don't know if I can do transcription, but he let me have a try. And so I remember it was episode 117 that I started in. I don't know why I remember that number, but I've been doing the transcript every week since then. In fact, I do wonder if I have listened to Mike Heiser for more hours than any other human being on this planet because I have to listen at half speed and it takes a really long time. Yeah. So the podcast has been just a very, very steady force in my life all these years. And it also had the added benefit of connecting me to Fern and Audrey. was very interested in them when they came on the podcast the first times. And then they asked me through Mike to do a transcript for them. And ridiculously, I asked them, is there anything else I can help you with? And that led to me being part of their curriculum team. So I've been working with them for a few years to discover or to develop the curriculum to help train people to do what they do. And we're still in the thick of developing that. So what a blessing in my life to be connected to those ladies too. So yeah, like so many of your listeners, my life is just changed by having Mike's consistent voice in my ear. So I've come to evaluate my own life in terms of believing loyalty, like so many listeners have been saying. I know that I think so much better because of Mike. I evaluate information more accurately. I'm more careful about which rabbit trails I take or how far I'll go with them, that sort of thing. I read better books because of Mike's influence. In fact, every time there's going to be an interview with somebody, I say to my husband, I'm going to have to buy another book because there's going to be an interview with a scholar. Mm-hmm. So I think because of Mike, I've really learned how to be content with just the simple idea of being useful within the body of Christ, because I know that's what mattered so much to him is just being useful. And the whole idea of being an imager of God and that being my vocation in the world, it influences everything from whether I'm teaching a class or doing my dishes or working in my garden. If I'm bringing order out of chaos, I'm being an imager of God. And I don't know, just again, the steady voice of that in my ear all these years has affected how I see life and the way that I have purpose and peace. So I've been really moved just seeing how much impact one single person can have on so many other people. And I think Mike would say, I learned from so many people too. And that's why I know what I know. And I'm just passing it on to you. So when I think about it and read those tributes, I'm just so eager for that day when we're all together on the new earth and we get to just tell each other our stories and see how each one's influence interacted and intersected and created this huge web of helping each other know the Lord better. And I don't think Mike would want us to elevate him too far, but he would want to be seen in the context of the greater work that's happening for the kingdom. But in my life in particular, he's been a really, really significant link in that chain of me becoming who I am. I do think it's appropriate right now for us to express our fondness for Mike and our gratitude for all he's taught us and for the way he poured into each of our lives. So it's a privilege to be able to speak for so many others who listen to the podcast and to be able to say those things out loud. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Trey.
Yeah, and thank you for your dedication to the transcripts. They're invaluable.
Glad to be useful.
I'm blessed to be with David Burnett now. Listeners of the podcast absolutely know David Burnett. He did some fantastic episodes with us in the past. And hey, David, I really appreciate and thank you for coming on.
Hey, Trey, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish it was under better circumstances, but I'm so happy to have met you through Mike and the work that you're doing. Mike is Help Exposed, and it's fantastic work, and it's been a pleasure. I mean, it's awesome to have met you in person and hang out with you, and just for me personally to be a fly on the wall and hear you and Mike kind of go at it sometimes about theology. It's been fun over the years.
Yeah, it really has, and I hate these are the circumstances too. So many wonderful memories hanging out with y'all and at SBL over the years and conferences and just being on the podcast so many times. And I have nothing but wonderful memories.
Can you take a few moments to speak about how Mike has influenced your work and what he's meant to you?
Absolutely. It's hard right now because I'm very emotional about this. So I hope y'all bear with me. But Mike, it's hard to overstate how big of a role Mike has played in my early adult life in biblical studies. I remember back in my undergrad is when I met Mike at a conference after being exposed to his work from my teacher and friend, Daniel Street, in a apocalyptic literature class talking about where the background was to all these angel hierarchies that were popping up in Second Temple and New Testament. And I was always into the esoteric apocalyptic stuff going on that in Christian origins. And he pointed me to Mike's work and says, he thinks it's coming from the divine council in the Old Testament. And I was like, divine council? And I had started doing ancient Near Eastern studies at that time in college as well, like Old Testament backgrounds and such. And he read Mike's work and then ended up loving it and meeting him at a conference. And he graciously invited me to dinner with his wife and Ron Johnson and his wife and I think another friend. But we had some amazing conversations, and I was just throwing all these ideas I had after reading his work at him, and he was loving it and I was loving it. And it just hit off this really great relationship that's lasted all these years. And my goodness, that may be about 20 years ago now or so, maybe somewhere around there. But emails and phone calls. And when I was a poor graduate student early on, he would have me be his roommate at SBL for a few years. And we had just the best time coming back in the evening and nerding out and talking Bible and ancient Near East and early Judaism and apocalypticism and everything, and just mulling over the papers we had heard and just having conversations till wee hours of the morning sometimes. And those were really special for me, and I'll never forget them. And then being on the podcast, inviting me on the podcast. I remember when he told me he was going to start this podcast, and it's been so many years. The first episode I did was back in 2015. And I've been on, I think, 9 times since then, doing personal episodes and conference interviews. And the first couple Q&A episodes we did, that was fun. And then I had the pleasure of speaking at the Naked Bible Conference back in 2019 with Mike, and which was really cool because Daniel Street had spoken at the first one in 2018, who had originally introduced me to Mike's work. So it was this cool sort of, full circle kind of experience. So I wouldn't have had my relationship with Mike if it wasn't for him initially. And then so Mike has become, early on, was just a wonderful mentor to me and became my thesis reader for my master's, my outside reader. And I remember when he was going through the initial edits of what became Unseen Realm, his popular book, which I think originally he was going to call The Myth That Is True, something like that. And I remember reading the early edits and giving feedback on that book. And when I saw the book come out and read in the acknowledgments that he said that I was the doctoral student he'll never have, that just meant a lot to me, because he was such a huge influence and mentor and became a dear friend to me. And having that in print now means all the more, considering the situation. And so the love he's shown me over the years and all the time that he gave me, whether it be conversations or questions or sharing research or whatever it may have been, or just sharing our personal lives together or arguing about theology and politics or something. But it's just been memories that I'll forever cherish. And I'm just so thankful for his impact. I'm so thankful for the step that he is in so many Christians' lives who want to get into a deeper reading of the scripture and be exposed to the historical setting of a lot of these texts and be exposed to the wild world that is biblical studies in the academic side of things. And he's always tried to bridge that gap between faith and academia, and I've always respected him for it, regardless of where I land now. I'm just so thankful for his work, his dedication, his devotion, and the love that he has shown me and so many others, and the sacrifice of his time and his effort and his energy. It's just remarkable how much energy he's had for this and the joy that he brings to it. It really does inspire a lot of people. And I know I'm most certainly not the only one that has been inspired and influenced by Mike. So to say I'm thankful for him would be a truism. Mike, personally, I want to thank you so much for what you've meant to me over the years and what you've meant to so many. And your work is important, and it will leave a lasting impact. And I wish I had more time to laugh and talk and eat with you, but I am thankful for the time that I've had. I love you and your family, and you all will be in my prayers. Thank you.
Well, I have a special guest that I brought on, Guy Malone from RoswellMission.org. And Guy, I know I've met you at the 75th Roswell anniversary.
Hey.
And I told you, and I'm sure some of the listeners may or may not know, but I wanted to bring you on because you're the person that's responsible for me finding Mike and the Naked Bible podcast in its current form. So without you, there wouldn't be me and Mike. And it was probably around 2004, 5, somewhere around there, where you were doing conferences about the Bible and aliens, in Roswell, and you had several guests on, and Dr. Mike Heiser was one of those. And when I heard him speak at your conference online, I immediately ordered every DVD that you were selling from you.
Wow.
And I consumed all of the content that you were producing. I think Alien Resistance was one of your websites in the past. And
yeah.
And that's how I came to be. So I was one of those people on the fringes that found Mike. And I was like, you know what, that is the first time, because I was discovering all these dots myself. And when I heard him articulate his position, that was the first time I heard a biblical scholar connect the dots for me. And I said, that's it. Aha, that's it. And it was through you that you made it happen. So I wanted to first tell you, thank you again, and how grateful I am for you doing what you did all those years ago. And I'm just fascinated how you discovered Mike and what led you to bring him into your conferences, because that's such a big that was a new concept back then, the Bible and UFOs and all that entails in the fringe. And I applaud you, sir, for doing that and spearheading that. And thank you so much again.
Thank you, brother. It was new, and Mike was an integral part of it, honestly, from the foundation. I love that you said you discovered Mike through that effort. And if nothing else, that might be one of the greatest achievements of my work here, is introducing so many people to Mike Heiser via the conferences. And we met personally. Like, I won't say I knew him, but we were communicating back when he was just Mike, security guard, working his way through college, working nights. But how we met is I had moved from Nashville to Roswell, New Mexico, and one of the most random connections ever, someone sent me an email. Turned out it was Mike's former, maybe even current at the time, I don't know, but no, former. He and Trina were married. Doug Vardell sent me an email, and his sister was attending the church I used to attend when I lived in Nashville before I moved to Roswell. They actually prayed over me and sent me to Roswell, like with, the hands-on and here's a little cash and, the blessing to go and do this thing, which was very unusual for a Christian church to even mess with this topic back then. But Doug sent me an email because his sister had met my mom and heard about me in Roswell, and Doug's college roommate was just writing this book called The Facade. It sounded so random and like, what, who, huh? And he sent me the book, and that was right about the time Mike started doing an appearance, his first appearance on Art Bell. I hope people still remember that name, but it was Coast to Coast, now with George Nuri, but Art Bell was the host then. And Mike came on there quite a bit to discuss his book, The Facade, the novel. And the hook always seemed to be the challenging Zechariah Sitchin as an ancient languages scholar. And I don't have to tell that story. I know your listeners or anybody that knows Mike is very familiar with that. The point is his appearances on Art Bell led him to being invited to speak at the Bay Area UFO Expo, which is a convention I'd already been to once before in the past, with a vendor table with books and kind of tracts I'd written, all kinds of Christian material, just biblical perspectives on UFOs and abductions. So he was doing his Zechariah Sitchin talk, and also could Christianity accommodate a genuine ET reality? So I got to work the table with him. David Flynn also attended that. And this was 2001, I should mention. That was the same week 9/11 happened. So this is like 9/15 or 9/16 that this conference is happening. Bay Area, it's kind of new agey. Stephen Greer was one of the speakers. He was a speaker at the dinner. And I remember at this one point, Mike and David and I all just kind of steeling ourselves and stiff at something he said about the government and aliens or something. We were all like wondering if we were even in the right room or going to get accosted. But I just have this random photo that it wouldn't take much work to find, but it's David Flynn. If you remember him, I would imagine, don't you, Trey?
Of course. Absolutely.
Okay. Excellent. I hope a lot of your listeners do too. But David, Mike, and I all sitting around in a hotel room on the bed in T-shirts going through something. And I later captioned that photo on the internet, whether it's true or not. Hey, you know what? We should have our own conference. And that is how it started. Mike and David and I don't think we agreed to. It seemed like inevitable, like it had to be done with all the stuff we were hearing at secular conferences. And nobody's really doing this from a biblical perspective. So he came originally in 2003, and then 2004 was a big one as well. We had some non-Christian speakers there. He wound up going to speak in Washington, D.C. at Stephen Bassett's disclosure conferences up there as a result of the introduction. So I have location because I'm in Roswell. But Mike had the brains. He'd done the work, the discipline stuff to actually do this, talk about it in a much more academic setting. I used to love saying, I'm here to introduce to you he whose sandals I am not worthy to tie or whatever. I've got location, but here's Mike Heiser, PhD. So he came to Roswell and he gave the definitive Nephilim and Genesis 6 speech, which is what I was asking him for. And two things that always stood out to me with Mike from early days is one, he was so kind that you would often hear him say things like, Guy asked me to cover, or somewhere else would be the conference organizer wanted me to. And he was so patient with the people in the audience. He was always there to serve. It's like he didn't have his own agenda. He just he listened to what you were doing. Okay, I will help with that. But when it came to the time with the question and answer, he could field the most random and sometimes bizarre and even hostile questions that would come from the audience without judging. And he would affirm either their intelligence or their struggles or their point of view in his answers, and very patiently steer it back to what we would call an orthodox biblical answer, or at least a good academically supported, answer to their struggle or their question. And I leaned over once and I remember just asking Drina, it's like 2004, is it just me, or other than academic, does Mike have like some serious pastoral giftings happening here? Like, does he do that, or are you applying? And she said that he had applied for churches that were advertising for a lead pastor or teacher, but she said that they would Google him. And because of this UFO topic, he was basically unemployable from the point of view of most church settings. And then, he drifted off to basically create Middle Earth and be a resource to the body that wasn't attending your typical church settings.
What a great story. Do you still have that photo of you, David, and the late David Flynn and Mike?
I bet I do. But yeah, I bet I could. I will endeavor to find it in the next day or two and see if I can actually send it to you.
That'd be great. What an awesome blessing for you to be right there at the genesis of pretty much Mike's career.
Yeah, he was just beginning speaking. The books were published. I remember Boyd Barrett. He was a deacon at my church here in town, which they loved Mike Heiser and Joe Jordan. They came out to see him a couple times, and that has really helped me with his credibility and his compassion, that it helped the local church even acknowledge that the work that I was here for was worth supporting. Like I said, him and Joe Jordan both, they saw, but he got his degree finally, and it was our church elder, sorry I strayed, Boyd Barrett, who said he had the honor of being the first person to introduce in a public conference setting Dr. Mike Heiser, PhD.
Awesome.
So,
that
was a shift.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, after you had those conferences, what kind of feedback did you get from people for what y'all were doing?
From people on the internet, it was great. Occasionally you would have, it's the same thing that I started with in the late 90s with my webpage. I would have, and then this conference just reiterated, I would have UFO or ufology people mad at me for bringing my old superstitious religious junk into this. And then I would have UFO people or religious people mad at me for bringing the weird topic of UFOs into Orthodox biblical stuff. And it really took Mike to actually bridge and to be able to satisfy like both sides of that. So the churches, sometimes, we've all had our degree of being ignored or anything like that. But Mike really helped make the point of view that many of us were independently working to bring about very accessible and very understandable to people. So, like I said, my local church wanted to come and see him again when he came back. At least the leadership did. But it was just this being Roswell and UFOs, how we make our money as a city, so to speak, that it wouldn't fly in a huge way. But Mike did a lot to help the body of Christ in general that was curious about these topics, that was not getting answers on these topics to get good, solid answers. So I always viewed him as a pastor or a counselor who was also an academic. And again, he was just Mike for a chunk of my life. It was actually weird watching him go from Mike to Dr. Michael Heiser, PhD, but I'm so glad he did, and I know you are too.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough. I just want to say thank you again for all that you've done in introducing Dr. Michael Heiser to the world, and the rest is history. So thank you again for coming on and honoring Mike, and I know he appreciates it.
I love you, Mike. God bless you, Drina, kids, everybody. But thank you for enriching my life, Mike and Drina, and I'm glad I was able to help you reach others with your life's work.
Oh, what a great conversation with Guy. I wanted to bring Guy on because if it wasn't for him, this podcast might not have existed, at least in the form that I'm involved. If anything, Mike was a dot connector, and you never know who are going to connect those dots. And Guy was one of those that had a dot. He had those conferences way back when. And I discovered Mike because of that. He helped connect those dots. So blessing to us all that was. And I was so blessed to have gone to the 75th Roswell conference with Mike, and we did some interviews for Paranormal. And I got to tell Guy, thank you in person. I'm so grateful for him. So thank you, Guy, for coming on and sharing your stories. I'd get so mad throughout the time when people would critique Mike's work. I'd get irritated and offended and worked up, and, I wanted Mike to debate them and smash their teeth in. But Mike had so much grace. He always took the high road. That's what true confidence is. You don't need to engage, but only have compassion. I'm so thankful and glad that we recorded hundreds upon hundreds of hours of Mike's teachings, and I pray it blesses all of y'all as much as it blesses me. I see so many people out there starting their own podcast and teaching similar things. Let's do that. Everyone, pick up a flag and do something, no matter how small you might think it is. All I ask is that you give Dr. Heiser the credit he deserves if he inspired you. Let's all move this content forward. And it doesn't have to be this exact same divine counsel content. If it inspires you to get into the Bible, into the weeds, learn it more, get closer to God, it does not matter. Let's all pick up the flag and move it forward. It motivates me to do more. I take this responsibility very serious. Mike and I still have a couple of projects that will see the light of day, and I've asked several scholars to help me finish 1 Samuel for the podcast. Give me some time to finish that and mourn and rest. But the podcast will continue. And if you'd like to help make that happen, please support us at nakedbiblepodcast.com. It's the only place that you can go to support the show. If you enjoy the podcast and have this past 8 years, please help me continue it by going to nakedbiblepodcast.com and supporting this content. I'd like to keep the tributes for Mike going and give our audience a chance to say a few words. And if you go to the nakedbiblepodcast.com website, you'll see a button there where you can leave me a message that I will collect and create an episode with all of y'all's tributes. So if you'd like to say something, and I'm going to leave it up through the whole month of March. So March 31st for the next 4 weeks, I'm going to leave it up there. I know he would have enjoyed that. So please visit nakedbiblepodcast.com and feel free to leave a message honoring Mike. I'm so honored and grateful to have worked with Mike for so long. Something about Mike being an Elohim now tickles me. Rest now, Mike. You have earned it. Thanks for everything. God bless.